is going and what needs to happen next. So yeah, Mark, it seems like you're pretty ready. Feel free to take it away.
Thank you very much, Habib. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see my screen. And I'm very happy to be with you today. I hope everybody is well. I'm talking to you this afternoon from sunny Paris, which is the only good news right now happening in this country and across Europe. But we'll get through that together. Very happy to share with you about 10-15 minutes. I'll be quick, I'll be short. I'll try to stress what I think are the main messages and takeaways from the study and the report, for which I really want to thank GESAC. They have been a fabulous partner in crime to actually open their books, be about as truthful as possible and as daring as possible in the reality of the cultural and creative industries in Europe before the crisis, during the crisis, and after the crisis. And also to GESAC's partners, multiple partners across Europe and across the 10 sectors that make the cultural and creative industries. I'll tell you all about that in a second. So what I thought I'd do this afternoon to really open our discussion is to take you in 3 steps through the before, the during, and the after. You can see here some of the main messages, and I will elaborate on most of them in my presentation. The sheer weight of the economy of culture, a heavy weight before the crisis. You will see, and I think you will understand, as a lot of you unfortunately experience right now, the enduring impact of the crisis on pretty much the whole culture and the whole economy of culture and jobs and innovation and investment. But there is hope. There is hope if the sector works together, counts on creativity, entrepreneurship, but also on some of the support that is being brought by the European Commission, by the member states, and I'll tell you about that in a third section. But first, I want to start with a few words of introduction about the report. It is pretty straightforward based on the 2014 report that GESAC had asked us to do the first real report on the economy of culture in Europe, to which we added a global report back in 2017, I believe, and several country reports on, you can see here, the French report that was published last year and which we updated throughout the crisis with the help of France Creative, the national representation of GESAC and representation of the 10 sectors that you can see here that really represent the widest span. There are multiple definitions of creativity and creative industries, but I think this one coming from UNESCO is the one that is the most stable and actually represent the wealth, the diversity of creation. We can, always add activities that are very creative in industry, in food, in fashion design, for instance. But this is really culture at its heart, and I think we can, if we have a stable picture, look at all the years that you can see on the right-hand side. We went back to our previous study. We looked at 2019 as the last benchmark year, and of course we estimated as much as possible the impact of the crisis for 2020. And as I said before, we didn't stop there to the risk of being depressed. And we really worked with multiple interviews, workshops with GESAC and many partners to kind of draft and design and propose today a platform for the growth, the return to better health of the sector, but also its growth and transformation in the years to come. First, I think it's very important to stress what culture had become in the past 2 decades in Europe, a real heavyweight, a real economic heavyweight. This is a very important message because maybe contrary to some other sectors that have been organized, more structured, that have a long history of collective discussions with authorities, the economy of culture or the world of culture and creativity had not made its case, probably its economic business case, well known, and again, as visibly as other sectors. But in truth, what is obvious now is that with 643 billion euros at the end of 2019, the sector represented 4.4% of the European GDP in terms of value added, 253 billion euros. I'll try to be very modest with the numbers, almost 2% of European GDP. What few people know is that the economic contribution of the cultural and creative industries is bigger than telecommunications, high tech, pharmaceutical, the automotive industry. This is a message that I think has to be stressed, as much as has to be stressed that it's a growing economy. It was a growing economy, I should say, before COVID hit the continent. 2.6% on average in the past 6 years. So an economy that has grown faster than the average European economy. It actually translates into the creative workforce, dynamic and diversified. Dynamic because with 7.6 million people employed, staffed, and mostly active in one of the 10 sectors, it's an economy that had managed to create 700,000 new jobs over the past 6 years, 700,000. And you can see some of these sectors here detailed. It's creative businesses and organizations, producers, developers, distributors, creative agencies, editors, broadcasters, museums. So the whole variety of entities, systems, platforms, business model, we should say in the EY language. What I found very interesting is that 90% of this world, it actually tells a little bit about its vulnerability, but it's also very interesting in terms of private initiatives, entrepreneurship, the sense of empowerment, and the fact that you have will and entrepreneurs at the root and at the heart of the sector. 90% of the sector is made of small, medium-sized businesses, but even more so micro enterprises or individuals making the sector and making their life and their living out of the sector. In terms of diversity, the challenge of diversity in the sector is, of course, still in progress, as you can see in the film industry and in other industries. But when you look at the workforce, basically you have a sector that is almost half made and staffed by women, and it's actually more than the rest of the workforce in the European economy across all industries and all sectors. So I wanted to stress that although there is progress to be made, there is also some bright sides to this diversity in the sector. In the time before the crisis, I think also it's important to stress some of the strengths and positive changes which we see as opportunities for the sector, and some of the challenges that actually kind of aggravate the state of the sector and the creative economy as we speak. The first positive challenge or opportunity that I want to stress is the fact that for Europe, the cultural and creative economy contributes very positively to the soft power of Europe, very often criticized for its dispersion. But in terms of sheer numbers, you can see here 8.6 billion euros in trade balance, positive trade balance in cultural goods in 2019. It's actually pretty equivalent or fairly equivalent to the trade balance of the food, drink, and tobacco industry, which is more recognized for its export capacity and activity outside of Europe. Of course, the main markets in the book, audiovisual, even in the tourism-related industries, events, music, etc., performing arts, and I can't name all of them at the same time. The biggest markets are still in Western and Southern Europe, but the double-digit growth actually comes from Central and Eastern European countries, which have made culture even part of their social fabric, and actually takes the whole leveling up of the population, of the European sentiment up to a certain level. Heavy investment in innovation and digitization. There is a lot of talk, and we're going to talk about that because it's also one of the vulnerabilities of the sector in a lot of digitization and innovation in the way the experience is produced, but also, and I want to stress that, in the technical, in the commercial, in the production of cultural events, cultural arts, cultural works. And in a world of innovation, creation is innovation at heart. There should be probably more support schemes to help entrepreneurs or individuals and companies and public organizations of the sector. One of the misconceptions about the sector is that it is heavily subsidized. I think you can make a poll, maybe across and in this session, and you'll hear anything from 60%, 80%, 40%. I've heard everything. The reality of the public financing of the cultural and creative industries in terms of the share of revenues coming from the public sector, national, regional, and local, is only 10.8%. And it's actually decreasing. You see, it was 11.5% in 2013. So I think it's good in economic terms if you're looking at it from a business perspective, and it's done good to other sectors, telecoms, automotive, etc. But it also is a reason for fragility that not everybody knows or expects from the sector. In the lower half, what I want to stress is, of course, there's been a massive explosion, not just because of 2020 and staying at home imposed internet as a channel, as a medium, as an experience that is actually for most of us against our will, but 81% of EU internet users now use the internet for music, videos, and games. That's a reality. And a lot of artists and creators are adapting to that. And the growth of online cultural content is double-digit, 11.5 in the past per year for the past 5 years. This is a fact. But what it creates is an imbalance of power with the fact that you have global intermediaries and platforms on the internet, and the imbalance of power between a world of micro enterprises, which I stressed for a reason a few minutes ago, and the massive weight, power, imagination, and entrepreneurship of net giants, intermediaries, and platforms creates an imbalance that creates many problems, many debates. Some are being solved as we speak, again, by the European Commission or member states, but the remuneration of rights holders, the proper functioning of the markets, the fight against illicit content and the protection of intellectual property. But in economic terms, this is very, very much at the heart of the debate. But also in economic terms, it creates imbalance that some sectors have tried to solve by encouraging many concentrations and also helping European giants in their selves to grow and to actually protect some of the assets that are located and are taxed in Europe. And I think we need to talk about that in our debate. I want to stress that because I thought actually what happened in 2020, you've heard about it. I'm sure most of you have read the report, which is available on rebuilding-europe.eu. The impact of the crisis is massive, minus 31% in terms of revenue. So the sector as a total lost almost 200 billion euros of value in a year. And if I can speak a little bit about 2021 without being able to give you a number, we know that we are going from a black year of closures, restrictions, lockdowns, curfews, to a year that will be probably for the first half, most of the first half, as dark, and as a total, probably very impactful more than most other industries, to the exception of air transport, which is slightly more impacted per our estimates than the cultural and creative industries. But the massive impact of the crisis is obvious now, and it actually translates into 2 million jobs, almost 2 million jobs at risk, maybe loss also of vocations for young artists and creators, and also for established or mature artists, creators, and companies that may have to diversify, go elsewhere, and make a living. And that probably be a loss for the long term that we have to take care of. Some of the consequences of the crisis are here on this screen. I want to take you through this quickly to save some time for the debate and just be mindful of your time. Some of the consequences I think I've insisted enough: the drop in royalties, the increase in production costs. This will create further vulnerabilities for a sector made of individuals, micro enterprises, small and medium-sized entities, and public organizations or publicly financed organizations that do not solely depend on public finance. And again, 11% in total means that the sector has to probably count on itself for most of the future, and that is something that we need to stress. Banks are becoming also more careful across all industries, not only for this sector, but we have to be mindful of that. The tighter public expenditure that will be created by fewer tax revenues for most member states is also an issue that we heard during our interviews and our workshops. One of the points that I really wanted to make is on the left-hand side, the fact that consumer spend on digital models do not compensate for the loss of revenues generated in physical sales. If you take the example of music sales, for instance, physical sales, CDs, vinyls, will be down 35%, have been down 35% on average in Europe in 2020, whereas the revenues, the digital revenues from the recorded music industries have only grown by approximately 8%, according to the sources that we looked at. And for some artists, performers, or organizations that experience the live concert, internet live concerts, they know how difficult it is to monetize this experience, although it's life as we know it, and it has to continue, but finding its business model and not forgetting that the loss of physical, the loss of live and retail experiences are not at all compensated by the digital explosion and the digital growth that we all experience. We think that the outlook will be fairly gloomy for the next year or so, next year, maybe 2 years, because of the need to regenerate income, revenues, and to actually compensate and pay back some of the loans in some countries. Actually, I wanted to take you throughout Europe before concentrating and ending this presentation on what we think are the 3 main challenges and priorities that we should put forward for this debate. Here you have not localized, because we didn't want to point to a particular country that has supported the culture and creative industries more than another. Of course, there have been massive support in some countries, and I think probably where the culture has been taken into account despite the sanitary restrictions, etc. And it's happened everywhere, from tens of millions to a few billion. So actually there is a wide span of public support on top of the regular support systems that are available for all the economies. But here on the right-hand side, you have some of the examples of the recovery packages and the stimulus packages that have been put together by member states. I think it's important to understand that if we are expecting a European support and help and assistance to the recovery and the transformation of the sector, it has to start or leave and happen at the same time as it happens at the member state level. So it was important for us to kind of paint a picture of how much investment is being supported in cultural infrastructure, how much the green transformation of our economies is happening also and trying to take place in the cultural sectors, for instance, in terms of mobility to help, and circular economy to help some of the events be carbon positive or carbon neutral at minimum. the transformation also of cultural organizations, public and private, but we insist here that a lot of efforts have been made in some member states to transform the administration of culture and the support of culture at local and national level. There have been initiatives also to reform some of the social security systems, very present, even generous in some countries, and absolutely absent in a lot of the EU countries. The support to performing arts have been front and center in some countries because it is the first sector to suffer almost minus 90% in terms of loss of revenues. Habib, I'll close by giving you and ending this presentation on the three priorities that the whole industry, the whole sectors, our partners, GESAC, has helped us put together. There is an issue with financing the return to growth. There is an issue with building an inclusive and more protective, I'll say the word, legislative framework to kind of compensate for the unbalance and the problems created by illicit content and the protection of intellectual property and copyrights. And also we feel, and our interviews show that everybody's very confident that culture can play a bigger role and a role in the green transformation of Europe, in the fact that it's also an element of the social fabric of Europe and can be part of the broader conversation of how tourism can transform, how retail and hospitality can transform, etc. There are very direct proposals in the report, which I don't want to go into details, from the 2% of the RRF that we propose to earmark, that's in pillar number 1, to the actual execution of the copyrights directive, which is very much at the heart of pillar number 2, and European collaboration between producers, protection of European content. There are a lot of probably 40 to 50 proposals and initiatives that I'm happy to discuss later, or that you can find again at rebuilding-europe.eu. And I'll let the panel discuss this. And I want to thank you very much for listening.
Thanks a lot for that, Mark. I think you managed to cover quite a lot in a short period of time. We have like just a few questions, which I think you can just respond to very quickly. The first of which is performing arts included in live music, in the live music category?
It is in all forms of performing arts. So it is in live music, and it is also in all other performing arts forms, theaters and many others. And so we have counted it both ways, and actually decoupling the addition. I mean, in economic terms, we've tried to be clean and very rigorous, but it's in every form and included in our report.
Okay, and same for video games and mobile games. Are they included in the games section? Yes, of course they are. And online gaming, of course, is very much at the heart of the only sector that experienced some growth in 2020. It's something that I should have pointed out. Of course, video gaming has had quite a significant growth during year on year, whereas others have lost downwards of 20, 30, 40, and almost 70 and 90% for the most affected sectors. Okay, and then the final one was, have we included the contribution of user-created content such as YouTube videos and self-publishing? I would imagine that is, yeah.
Yes. As much as we could do. It's not an airplane view of the sector, but of course, every question that you ask, every topic that you address, probably is worthy of a more in-depth analysis. But yes, I can confirm that we definitely considered, let me put it in broader terms, that the online platforms are not the enemies of culture. They're channels. They respond to an expectation and to actually new modes of experience by younger generations and actually more mature generations. The issue is not whether they exist and grow and should grow. They will grow. The distribution of revenues, the fact that they can reinvest, the fact that they can actually be part of the social ecosystems of the countries where they exist, so taxation. This is part of the debate, and I think a lot of them are very conscious of that. So yes, we did include them, and I think they should be part of the solution, whereas they are sometimes considered part of the problem, and we can't be too naive about it. It's probably a factor that has to be taken very seriously in the biggest crisis of our lifetimes, and not to aggravate the crisis with an imbalance, as I pointed out earlier, that is probably too big to bear for most of the actors of this economy.
Okay, I think that was it. Oh, there's one more question.
I'll come back later if you like. I just want to be,
This last question will be addressed in the next session anyway. So
okay.
Thanks a lot.
I'll be there.
You can stop sharing your screen.
Okay, I will. Thanks very much, Habib. Good luck.
Right on time as well. So Hugo will be proud. Okay, so let's move on to the second session. I'll briefly kind of introduce the session as my colleague working in the background kind of moves people across into the panel. Hopefully that goes smoothly. As I mentioned, we have speakers from the European Parliament, the European Commission, and we have 2 representatives from the creative industries. And the way we'll do this is that I'll ask each speaker an initial question, which they can of course respond to. And then for the second round of questions, it will be more of hopefully an open discussion where our speakers are welcome to interrupt each other or respond to whichever points have been made. Well, just briefly wait for everyone to come on screen before I start introducing everyone. I think we're almost there. I think we're pretty much there, just waiting for one more. So, okay, first of all, good afternoon to our speakers. I hope you're all well. Give you the obligatory message. I assume because you're here that you're well. So welcome. From the creative industries, we have Jessic's president and the CEO of Sesame, which is France's biggest author society, Jean-Noël Tron. We also have Pedro Sobral, director of the Portuguese book publisher Leia. From the European Commission, we have Vivian Hoffman, who is Deputy Director General at DG OAC. That's the Director General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. Also from the Commission, we have Mirta de Manuel, who is a member of Executive Vice President Dombrovskis' cabinet, who I think, as we mentioned just before Mark's presentation, our creative delegation met for the launch of the study. And from the European Parliament, I'm not sure if he's quite in the room yet, but we have Christian Eller of the European People's Party, who hopefully will be joining us imminently. My colleague is telling me in the background that that will be the case. So I think it's best that we get going with the questions because Mr. Eller was last on the list of questions anyway, so we can get going. So a big thank you to all of our speakers for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today. Like I said, we're going to focus on the reopening and the relaunching. So I'd like to start with our 2 creative industry speakers, if I may, as I think this will give us a good idea of the current situation on the ground. So Jean-Noël, I'll start with you. A very broad question. Can you please just tell us some more about the overarching strategy with this EY study and Jessic's ideas for it?
Thank you, Habib. And first of all, on behalf of JESAC, of the 32 European Society and the 1 million plus creators that we represent, thank you to all of you to attend these 2 sessions, and congratulations for Mark Lamit once again to be so stressed to the point in illustrating our strategy. What is the JESAC strategy in that? It's a very clear one that we have embarked on a few years ago, which is to explain, rally, and propose. By this, I mean, we need to be the yes party. We want to be as representing so many creative forces of Europe, those who provide facts and ideas, and basically providing studies like the EY studies that Mark Lermit has reminded us of the tremendous importance has been a contribution in explaining that cultural and creative industries are really at the core of the EU strengths. And it's really our belief that after the COVID crisis, it's going to be even more true than it has been before, especially in an environment where there will be more and more competition between great powers like China, the US, or Russia, especially because, by the way, China, the US, or Russia do have a very engaged, hostile sometimes, or aggressive in many times strategy when it comes to their creative industries. Soft power is really embedded into their strategy, and we believe that for the EU, with its motto, United in Diversity, we all together represent, with our great variety of genders, arts, business models. Some of us are for-profit, others are non-profit, some are public control entities in culture. Most of the value of culture in Europe is private sector, as has been shown by Mark Lermit. Altogether, we need to be united. So explaining what we are with studies, explaining the losses due to COVID, rallying supports, and I'd like to thank the 20 organizations that have joined JESAC in commissioning this study. And last but not least, and that's the most important part of our strategy, making proposals, having ideas, things to offer to our politicians, to our regulators, to our MEPs. So in a nutshell, what we did on the 26th of January was, as mentioned initially by Habib, thanks to this study, to raise tensions from the European Commission. And I think it was instrumental that we could have 7 meetings with various vice presidents and commissioners. We started with Commissioner, Executive Vice President Vladis Dombrovskis, and then we had a very interesting exchange with some of his colleagues, the Commissioner Nicolas Schmid in charge of jobs and social rights, VP Margaritis Skinas in charge of promoting our European way of life, then with VP Drufa Schwitzak on democracy and demography, with Commissioner Thierry Breton on internal market, with Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni on economy, and last but not least, with Commissioner Maria Gabriel in charge, as we all know, of innovation, research, culture, education, and youth. And on each and every of these rendezvous, with a delegation of artists, producers, publishers from all over Europe, we try to focus on 3 main messages that will simply briefly explain and share, because we had very actual, concrete answers. And I'm sure that Mirzad Emmanuel, who works with VP Dombrovskis, will elaborate on that. Number 1, our belief that more than ever, especially after this crisis, CCI will be one of the key leverage to bring back Europe on the track of leadership, growth, cultural diversity, and being part of the answer to jobs, growth, to what we have to say to the young generations, but also to address the key topics of the new EU agenda, especially, of course, when it comes to greening our environment, and also promoting the European values worldwide. Number 2, that on a much more urgent base, we need a European coordinated post-lockdown strategy of Europe's cultural venues and events. And when we said that, it was 2 months ago, and as we have seen then, and we have seen since that, the situation has kind of deteriorated in many European countries, because there have been new lockdowns and because there have been no coordination so far. And when we were sharing these convictions with the key commissioners that I mentioned, one of the biggest festivals in the world, which happened to be in the UK, so outside of the EU, had just announced that it would cancel its 2021 edition. But as you maybe know, or probably not, for most of the main continental Europe festivals, big artists coming from outside of Europe tend to first attend a big festival in the UK and then go to other festivals in Europe. So when this big festival is being cancelled, we know that many important festivals in the EU will be automatically cancelled. And on that, I must say that we were really thrilled to see what happened at the European Commission level. This is really a sign that because of this crisis, but also maybe thanks to this crisis, at the EU institutions level, people want to just accelerate, go, I would say, faster than one we used to do on a non-crisis environment. So when Thierry Breton and Maria Gabriel have worked fast and already proposed an initiative last week in their communication on, I quote, a common path to safe and sustained reopening, that's really a clear sign of what I'm sharing with you. We had this rendezvous 2 months ago, we already have an answer. And I just want to confirm here that JESAC, together with all its partners, is of course ready to work immediately on this objective, as we wrote in a letter that is public, that was published last week, to Commissioner Breton and to Commissioner Gabriel. Number 3, we really want to be sure that in the recovery and resilience national plans, CCI will be in the agenda, and if possible, top of the list and not bottom of the list. And that's not that obvious. And I must say that VP Dombrovski, who among many other tasks is also in charge of overlooking the way, if I'm correct, member states will really implement this tremendous flow of money. We felt that we were well understood, and by the way, Commissioner Gentiloni, in charge of the economy, offered spontaneously that his teams could be contributive to helping us to crush the numbers, if I may. And what we say here is that we need to have a target. I mean, to have the ambition that 2% of that recovery and resilience national plans would be dedicated to CCI is not that ambitious. If you just think about the numbers that Mark Lermit from EY just shared with us, if you think about our contribution to the economy of the EU, but also to jobs, to bringing hope, to greenwashing initiatives that is not about greenwashing, but about really thinking about the next generation of value creative sectors in Europe, it has to be at the core of this strategy. And I just want here to inform you about another initiative that 110, to be precise, European organizations last week have taken in writing to the head of states and governments of the EU to urge them to do so. And we know that's not obvious, because when you talk about the airplanes industry, or about the car industry, or about agriculture, or education or health, these sectors are somehow managed the same way all over Europe. There are ministers in charge of industries, education, justice, or health. We know, for example, that when it comes to culture, that's not the case. And it's not a one-size-fits-all, thanks God, in the EU. In many countries, we know that the local administrations are really in charge of the cultural policies. And in some other countries, that's the case, for example, in France, the Ministry of Culture exists and have a strong role. But even in a country like France, more than 70% of the value is created by the private sector. that is simply very informally coordinated in some cases, like in Italy or France, with movements like France Creative that was mentioned by Marc Lermite, or Italia Creativa. In Italy, there are such organizations also in Germany, in Poland, soon to be in other countries. But that's part of the leverage we need. Last key message, of course, besides money, and we know that budgets and resources will be scarce after the crisis, it's above all at the legal framework that the EU plays a crucial role, because that's the appropriate level for all of us when it comes to authors' rights and copyrights. The 3 directives of 2019 have been a sign from the Europeans to the rest of the world that we can play a leading role in that. And of course, the enforcement of this new regulatory environment, it's going to be also part of the crucial leverage to activate, to be sure that after the crisis, we can react and go fast. So that's basically the messages that we delivered in these very important meetings with the commissioners. We already have some answers, and this was very encouraging. One last message we got, both from Mr. Breton and Mr. Giannittoloni, but also from Madame Gabriel, is that they encourages us very much. We were simply a modest delegations, but they very much encouraged us to formalize a permanent coordination of European cultural sectors. So we are working on that. We hope that before the summer, we will be able to formalize this. But I use the opportunity to see that MEP Christian Heller is with us to, first of all, thank him very much, because we all know that his contribution to the successes of 2019 were instrumental, but also because we know that at the European Parliament level, even if we don't have now the equivalent to the CCI intergroup that has been established before, he has been one of the key contributors to united the energy of many MEPs that are committed, if I may, to supporting our cause. And for that also, I want to tell him and tell you all that we will do our best to bring this mobilization to an additional level, to be a leverage as the European cultural sectors that we want to represent all together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jean-Noël. And I'm aware of the fact that you have to leave a little bit early, so we'll try to get back to you before the end, before you leave. If I can turn now to Pedro Sobral, Senor Sobral, from Portugal. I think it would be good if you can tell us, if you can explain to us how your work has been affected by this crisis. And actually, one of the questions we got during Mark's presentation that we didn't get round to was if we could present some good examples from member states across the CCI sectors reacting to the crisis. So I think you probably have some bad examples and some examples of how things could have been done better. But then also just to add on top of that, in the context of the preparation of the national recovery plans, which are of course based on this historic EU budget, I'd like to know kind of what people like you or in your position, organizations like yours, need from the EU as well as national authorities.
Yes, good afternoon to you all. We have good and bad examples, that's for sure. The cultural sector, mainly book publishing and book selling, were hit extremely hard, as you know, and this was across all countries. Of course, in the countries where the lockdown was more radical and didn't allow even sales or click and collect sales, it was hit harder. And this is a sector, and also across Europe, where retail is still critical for the good success of booksellers and authors, and of course, bookshops. Online sales across Europe have different weights. For example, in southern countries like Portugal or even Spain or Greece, the online sales are still a minority. So the brick and mortar are the main sales space. So during lockdowns, and some countries like, for example, Portugal, that are getting out of a second lockdown, it was pretty hard. So of course, the countries where the government supports or the capability to have specific supports, the countries that had that kind of support handle better the crisis, and most important, they were able to get out of the lockdowns faster and with capability to recover some of the income and some of the margin. The government, the countries where that specific support did not exist, the exit strategy, if you can call it like that, was still catastrophic. So, for example, Italy, I think it's a good example of how the government supports, and most of all, plans that were already in place before the pandemic and before the first lockdowns were able to give a support pillow to the stakeholders of the sector. In the countries where that kind of policies didn't exist, it was worse. And during the pandemic and during the lockdowns, those non-existent specific supports basically allowed the sector to go to 90 to 95% losses. So to try to answer your question, of course, in situations like this that are extremely fast and were not predictable, like the black swan that this pandemic is, if you don't have a specific support from the government, and at the EU level, the private sector has extreme difficulties to recover. Of course, we talk a lot and we listen a lot to how the sectors are trying to reinvent their own business. We saw in this UI study some examples of how we can go. But if we look at, for example, the Recovery and Resilience Plan that here in Portugal we have access to, where you had, or probably you can have some generic funds to the digital transition, this can be something that can be helpful, but will not be definite in the sector. And this is just to reflect what Mark was explaining. So the digital part is extremely small, and even if it's growing at 2-3 digits per year, it will not compensate what you are losing in the physical side of the business. And this is extremely important to understand in the book business. The book itself is still extremely important for the cultural diversity. I'm talking about the object, not what the book itself represents, but just looking at the object, it's extremely important for the cultural diversity. It's probably the main or the optimum technological tool still to learn and to distract and to entertain. So if we think that this digital transition will compensate the losses or will compensate what happened in this sector, I think probably we are living still in an illusion. I think it's extremely important to look at Italy, as I've told you before, or even France, where previous public policies were in place that helped during the pandemic, and then specific supports that were implemented during the lockdowns that were extremely helpful. And just to finish, not to lose more of your time, more than the support itself, financial or legal, I think it's the speed that we are able to implement it in the sectors that is extremely critical. If we have a very ambitious plan, financial and legal, and we take too much time to implement it locally and at a country level, probably it will appear in a time where it will not have a positive impact, or the positive impact that it will have, it will be extremely, extremely small. Just to finish with some numbers, you have countries in Europe in the book publishing business that lost between 30 to 40% of its value. And it's important to notice that after the big financial crisis in 2011, even countries that had a stable and big book market took 2, 3, 4 years to recover the loss from the big financial crisis. In Portugal, for example, the market lost 25% in at the end of 2011, and it was recovering those 25% at the beginning of 2020 before the first lockdown. So the sector took 9 years to recover the loss. So at the beginning of 2020, we were at the same place as in 2011. And now we are facing a bigger crisis, not only because of the lockdowns, but basically because of the uncertainty that we still have in the next 2 or 3 years. And all the disruption that the sector is having, that probably we are not still able to account. The new business models, the new way to consume content will be the audio format will be the future for the public in business. It's a question, I don't know. We know that during this pandemic it grew a lot, but as Mark was saying, probably it's not enough to recover the margin and the income that was lost from the print side. Will the ebook finally have a big positive impact? We also don't know. So if we don't have public policies in place at the EU level and at a country level, probably what we are seeing at this moment is more threats than opportunities for the cultural diversity that CCIs represent at European level. And as you were saying before, I think, Januel, when you look for the biggest blocks geostrategically to China, to US, we have to question ourselves where EU wants to be after this crisis with their CCIs.
Okay, thanks to both of you for that kind of view from the ground and view from the creative industries. As Jean-Noël mentioned there, I think you were both quite excited by this communication last week from the Commission. So it's probably good now to turn to Ms. Hoffman. Your services and Commissioner Gabriel in particular have exercised considerable efforts to voice and reflect the needs of the sector in policy and budget discussions since the beginning of the pandemic. So like I said, we were very encouraged by this communication last week. So perhaps you can maybe explain a little bit more about this communication and tell us what it means at the moment and how the coordination at EU level will be carried out and what we can expect from these guidelines, I should say.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me say that we highly appreciate JSAC's commitment and work and this recent study, which really helps disseminate important evidence on the conditions of cultural and creative sectors across Europe and raises awareness about the key findings and figures that show the very deep impact of the COVID crisis on the sector, of course, both in social, societal and economic terms. In the Commission, indeed, we have worked since the beginning of the crisis to support the cultural and creative sectors, and we have been working closely with stakeholders, with the member states, to reflect the importance of having strong and vibrant European cultural and creative industries for the recovery in policy and in funding decisions. For instance, the Commission has identified cultural and creative sectors as one of the 14 ecosystems on which member states should focus in their recovery efforts in the framework of the Next Generation EU package. The cultural and creative sectors are indeed key and fast-growing sectors in the Union and can play an important part in ensuring a sustainable recovery, generating both, of course, economic, social, cultural value, including from intellectual property. Now, indeed, in a number of events, discussions also with the Parliament and the Committee of the Regions, Commissioner Gabriel has reiterated the importance of investing at least 2% of the resources foreseen under the Recovery and Resilience Facility plans by the member states in culture, creativity, and the cultural heritage sector, as stated in the European Parliament's resolution on the cultural recovery of Europe. Last week, indeed, the Commission adopted a communication on a common path to safe and sustainable reopening after the COVID crisis, in which the Commission has explicitly included cultural and creative sectors in the list of economic sectors that are most in need of urgent coordinated strategies and actions at EU level aimed at a safe and responsible reopening of economic activities. In this regard, we committed to developing guidelines using existing cooperation and dialogue structures to design them, including networks and collaborative platforms that we set up at the beginning of the crisis to have tools for regular exchanges with and between the member states and with the sector, such as the Creative Unites platform, to facilitate these coordination processes. And we want to build on best practices to relaunch the cultural economy and cultural life according to safe and sustainable criteria, as well as with the aim of leveraging the importance of culture's contribution to health and well-being. And this is crucial to counterbalance many of the negative impacts of the COVID crisis on society, of course, not only in economic terms, but in view of the key role and benefits and the value of culture and creativity for people, for society in many areas in connection with Europe's recovery.
Thank you very much. Let me, because we're quite strapped for time already, I think, let me just go straight to Mr. de Manuel. The study has shown us that CCIs are some of Europe's leading industries, but as Mark alluded to in his presentation, it's quite a fragile ecosystem. It's heavily reliant on social exchange, obviously, and there's a lot of SMEs, freelancers, and youth employment. It's quite fluid. So we were quite encouraged by our meeting with Vice President Dombrovskis, and his kind of commitment to addressing the needs of the sector. So I was wondering if you could give us an update on the preparation and organization of the national recovery plans and how the Commission is kind of coordinating this and assisting the process, and in particular in the context of CCIs, of course.
Well, thank you, Habib, and thanks so much for this invitation. Indeed, EVP Dombrovskis had the opportunity to meet with you and to discuss the important role that the cultural sector plays in our economies, and the importance that this sector also is part of the economic recovery, as it is a sector, as many others, of strategic importance. Now, when it comes to the Recovery and Resilience Facility itself, I think it is important to have in mind the scope and the functioning of the facility. The facility aims at providing unprecedented financial resources to promote the recovery of the European economy, but not just a short-lived recovery or an immediate response. It really has the objective of increasing the growth potential of the European economy over the decades ahead, and to leap forward into the green and digital transitions and the transformations of our economies. So this is an overarching goal across sectors, and of course, also for the cultural sector. In that perspective, we are urging member states to include ambitious packages that comprise both reforms and investments that are coherent among them, precisely to ensure that the recovery is lasting and it's not just a quick surge in GDP while we are spending the money, and that disappears once the money is left. Of course, this long-term orientation is not just casual. I think it has become even more reasonable in view of the nature of the pandemic. If you look back last year, we expected, or perhaps we wanted to think this would just be a first wave, but things will come back to normal quite quickly, and this has not been the case. And actually, the pandemic has lasted for more than a year, making it very difficult for those sectors that rely, such as yours, to some extent. It depends, of course, on the type of production or cultural activity, but many of them rely on in person-to-person contact. And this will unavoidably have a permanent effect in many sectors and in many activities. It is difficult today to anticipate what will go back to normal, whatever normal means, and what will radically change. So in that perspective, the recovery and resilience plans need to really provide forward-looking measures, not looking so much at the past, but looking at the future and at helping sectors move in those transformations that will inevitably occur. This is not an easy task. It needs to be done together with the relevant sectors, because what those changes will be, only time will tell, and it will largely depend on what those sectors drive, with their knowledge on the ground of what other new business opportunities exist and how to transform themselves into, let's say, the future-proofed high-growth sectors that we want. So this is in the hands of member states, how to prepare their recovery and resilience plans. They are very busy with that effort. It is a titanic effort, I would say. We need to realize this is a program of reforms and investments for years to come. It's only 3 months since the Recovery and Resilience Facility regulation was approved in the sense of the political agreement being reached by Parliament and Council. It's much less since it was published officially and we delivered latest guidance on do no significant harm principle. So it's a process that takes time, but it's important that it's done well so that we achieve this goal across sectors of the economy. And indeed, the Commission and Vice President are deeply believe that this should be fairly distributed across sectors, not just let's say to split money evenly, but that we should really look at providing every sector with the opportunity to the extent that there are indeed projects of a strategic value and growth potential that come from those sectors. So from that perspective, it's very important that the cultural sector liaises with the member states to put forward those projects. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You just reminded me of a point that Mark made in his presentation, which I think is important to bring up again, and I'm sure Jean-Noël will make it, which is that, of course, this crisis won't end immediately for creators in particular, who many of them will be experiencing the drop and loss in royalties for years to come. So when productions do get going again and festivals and everything else, it's going to be a long road to recovery for many creators. Mr. Eller, if I can bring you in, I'm sorry you weren't here for our introductory messages, so good afternoon. So thank you for being here today. I mean, the Parliament has been very supportive of the creative industries traditionally, and since the beginning of this crisis especially, from keeping the issue on the agenda to pushing for greater recognition of the CCI's importance in industrial policy. And as Jean-Noël mentioned earlier, it's thanks to you and your work that we have greater funding for things like Horizon and other industry-related schemes. So with all that in mind, when it comes to culture, what do you think MEPs expect from the Commission in regards to implementation of the new EU budget, and what role can the Parliament play in all of this?
So thank you for having me. Sorry for being a little bit late, but due to my German nature, at least I wrote the study. I did read the study, which is somehow benefiting the general discussion, and I would like to thank you that you're yet again trying to drive the process. I'm going to say some very blunt and might be unpolite things, might be to my German nature, might be a little bit that the Parliament is a little bit at the very moment, institutionally, we are not really satisfied what's happening. Let's put it, where do we come? Because that sets the context. I mean, coming from the treaties and coming from the budget and coming from what had been attributed to the European Union, we went through a lot of phases in terms of the creative sector and the cultural and creative sector. Although you have to differentiate that specifically between the cultural sector and the creative industry. We started from we don't want because we can't. We neither had the instruments nor the treaties. Then we went through a phase we could, but we don't want, or we want, but we can't. Simply, we would start to understand, having that discussion now for 5 or 6 years. When we started in the beginning of the last term, simply we started to understand, but we didn't have the means. So right now we're in a phase where we could say we want, we could, but we are not well organized on all sides, and the efforts are fairly fragmented. And I think we need a new kind of exchange between, let's say, the European institutions and the stakeholders. Why are we able to act? Simply, and I say that bluntly, it is this strange creature like called the European Parliament who has a plan and had a plan. So it was for the first time that these, the ITRE committee and the CULT committee, two totally different creatures, never talked to each other in history, did a joint effort by defining an industry policy for Europe. Knowing the complicated nature of that, because there are non-commercial aspects, commercial aspects, it's related to skills, it's related to a lot of things. It's not quite comparable to an industrial sector, it's more complex, but in economic figures it is. But it has soft aspects which are worth to fund alone, but contribute substantially to the economic part. So where we put it in, and we had a plan before we started the negotiations 3 years ago. It is in the structural funds. It is in the Horizon program. It is in the financial instruments. It is in the EIC. So every fund, every program available, the Parliament was placing the creative industry and not just mentioning it with a purpose. So in the board of the EIC, for the first time, we got someone in Kerstin Bock from the creative industry, that in the EIC, the creative sector is represented, not being there before. We've talked about entrepreneurship, but not about in the creative industry. In the structural fund, almost not existing. I mean, it was the silo of the, let's say, cultural heritage, but not even addressed as an economic factor. So it's in the research program we could do. So why it is a problem, or where we are, from my point of view, we are losing this year. You might have, and you might have not, and that's the problem also for the stakeholders. You might have realized that in none of the Horizon calls, there is a CCI call. It's devastating. Is it the fault of the Commission? I mean, I think we shouldn't work with that kind of terminology, but at least, I mean, in the conversation between Commission and the member states and the German presidency, the same day as the German, there was nobody actually driving that into the working program. So there is no call on CCIs. It's on cultural heritage. We do some good things, but there is no call. Neither there is what you would expect if you roll out a new program, a platform call. We did that when we have the security research program with new sectors, with the digital sectors 10 years ago. We established platforms, pretty much saying we need a stakeholder consultation because we never talk to each other. We hadn't seen that from DG Growth in substance as an economic factor being perhaps more important than the automotive industry or others. So how does the stakeholder dialogue work? And how does it work specifically in economic terms and innovation terms? So from my point of view, that is to be established. We need a platform call where we inform each other, where we develop ideas in terms of the innovation potential, what should be funded, and so on. So there's no roadmap. We placed it as Parliament, and I have to insist that it was us doing that. And we had an idea. So what is in principle terms, or could be the idea? First of all, I think you had been referring to the publishing industry. I think it was the Parliament when we placed the content shift idea that we said we have to preserve, to develop, and then we might succeed. So on the one hand, it has an idea of preservation because it is due to our European culture. It might be of a non-commercial dimension and so on. But still, it won't stay the same because digitalization will drive things. The platform out there, copyright discussion had been there, the societal discussion had been there. So we have to preserve, we have to develop. Basically, their digitalization will be a driver, but other factors too that relates to skills, to train people, to the merger of innovation schemes and creative schemes and things like that. From my point of view, the problem right now is that in the council, you have the problem that the research minister are running the show in the Competitiveness Council, and they're not very related to the creative sector. It hasn't been a fight in the negotiation because they thought, what an exotic idea to see creativity and innovation combined. Although we see that 30% of the income of the automotive industry is by design. 30% no longer selling car. It's the design rights which reserves the income of the industry by 30%, and you can roll it out in a lot of other directions. So from my point of view, the council has a job to do, and this is on the one hand to get along with this Bermuda triangle between Ministry of Cultures, Ministry of Economics, and the research ministries. It has an agenda. That means we need a better working program. We need that in the recovery program. And the litmus test of all that is whether the member states come up with operational programs of the structural funds where the creative industry is embedded. That's the job for this year, because that we have to solve. We lost some time, but some issues we have to solve for that year. Then secondly, it's the Commission. I mean, we have this artificial silo between the cultural heritage. On the one hand, more or less in DG EAC. Then we have some people in the DG RTD, but also more related to cultural heritage. There is no direct link to the innovation and technology programs. You see that, no call. You see that in DG Connect, who has some knowledge. We had been writing that in the program, but also let's see whether in the working program you're going to see something like that. And then you have traditionally DG Grow with a relatively small sector, but some knowledge on that. I think what we actually need is now a merge, a cooperation, joint calls, and a roadmap between 3 DGs and not leaving them in that silo. I think that is to be organized. I think there's a political willing on the top level. I think Breton, Maria, the DG want from principle, but in real terms, you know, it's not well organized. On the stakeholder side, I mean, it's relatively easy for the Commission, never having dealt with the creative industry, like with the steel industry or chemical industry, where you have this program, these proposals year by year, what they want from the Commission. For the Commission, it's hard to tell right now is how to overcome this moral superiority of the victim being victimized by the COVID situation, and rightly so. But on the other hand, so preoccupied by that there is no roadmap which the Commission can go along with or can relate to or whatsoever. We need ideas, as it is with content shift, that we are saying digitalizing of publishing, as it could be in other sectors that we merge technology in health, as it is, and that I think is the shining example, although intellectually not really placed properly yet, is the Bauhaus. I mean, that is the idea where you want to link societal changes, ambitions like CO2 emissions, with creativity and innovation, with a Bauhaus being a brand for the transformative power of the creative industry in correlation to regulation and new technologies. I think that is a shining example, but still it's not discussed properly, but we're going to see that. But I think there are ideas in the Commission how a merge of the creative sector, innovation and growth could work. And the Bauhaus is a very good example, which could go in the right direction. So if I may wrap it up,
yeah, go ahead. Okay,
it's all in place. I think it needs the French presidency, to be honest. We're looking very forward to 22. If the French presidency says that's one of the issues we want to have, the Commission is going to march. We have to provide the Commission with the needed ideas, because the structures are not there. That is not pre-prepared. The Commission is confronted with a proposal in Horizon which wasn't their own. And even in terms of structure, they struggle now to organize, but that is possible. And then the four institutions, the Council, the Parliament, the Commission, and the stakeholders have this year to come to terms what we really want to have as a strategic agenda for the creative sector of the rest of the term. And I think historically, we're in a historic situation, because for the first time we want and we can. Either of that hadn't been there at times, but now we can. And I'm not very pessimistic, I'm just impatient. And I think there is a parliament having an idea, having placed that, and I think we can deliver, but I fear that we're going to lose 21 because we hadn't been prepared so well. All sides. We need also more precise, a precise roadmap from the creative sector, what they actually want. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it would be good to let the Commission respond to that. But first of all, Jean-Noël, as I know you have to leave early, I think that's still the case. If you'd like to give us your final words, perhaps responding to that, or perhaps telling us how you think culture can rebuild Europe.
Thank you, Habib. First of all, I just want to apologize, because just to tell you the truth, I have to attend a conference with our Minister of Foreign Commerce, Mr. Franck Riester, who used to be the Minister of Culture, dear Christian. And that's one of the advantage, I would say, in having personalities like Christian Heller at the European Parliament, because I think every one of us has been listening not only with great care, but with great excitement, was Christian, you just say. I think you're absolutely true, and I'd like to thank very much our three other participants to this roundtable, because we were exactly to the point. One, we need the three forces of the EU institutions to work together. Two, we need to be very agile, because the way things are being structured when it comes to the creative and cultural institutions and creative and cultural sectors is such that we have to be agile. So I love the idea of leveraging on the French presidency of the EU starting January 2022. Everyone knows that it's going to be also presidential election in France, which could make things not that easy, but that will make it all the more important for the French presidency to be very political on that. And we all know that one of the threats, and I will finish on that, one of the threats of our EU is that because it is so resilient, we have survived major crises over the last 15 years, and we have survived Brexit, and it was not that sure. 13% of the European population leaving our family is a tragedy. Because we have shown so much resilience, there is a risk that we don't anticipate the risk of a new crisis. And if a new crisis comes, I'm sure it will come from the citizens themselves. So we need to show them proofs, actual things that mean something to them in their daily life. And we also need to offer them a vision of something that is bigger than each and every one of us in our country, with our culture, with our identity. And this is, of course, the European dream that is still, thanks God, instrumental for many of us, especially for the young generation. So I just want to say to Christian Heller that point taken. We will focus on our side with JESAC, with all our partners, to try to crystallize, stabilize movements that will be contributing to these efforts. and we will come back to you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Noël. I'd like to give the Commission either speaker, but I guess Ms. Hoffman, the chance to respond to some of the things that Mr. Ellis said, if she so wishes, of course.
Thanks a lot. I'll try to say a few things briefly, because of course everything what was said would deserve a broader discussion and a bit more time, but just let me say that indeed over the last few years we have worked to mainstream culture in EU policies and to integrate the creative and cultural sectors as key pillars within the EU's growth and innovation strategies. And of course, this will go on, it needs to go on. And we are also focusing on helping to strengthen the visibility and the accessibility, by the way, and synergies in using all the culture-related funding opportunities and instruments at the EU level. So we will continue, of course, to discuss with the sector and support appropriate measures to build further evidence. Now, of course, new measures will address the culture sector's ecosystems. Innovation needs, digital skills, entrepreneurial spirit for reinforcing also the financial sustainability and other challenges to help the sector indeed in the digital transition, and as well to channel its contribution to sustainable development and the fight against climate change. Now, these policy guidelines inspire new funding programs, such as also Digital Europe. Now, with regard to Horizon Europe, there are two aspects which I would like to highlight, which we are very much looking forward to work on, which is the cluster about culture, creativity and inclusive society, so-called cluster 2, in which there will be relevant opportunities, we believe. And also, when talking about the European Innovation and Technology Institute, the future, let's say, rather knowledge and innovation community, which is precisely for the creative sectors, the cultural creative sectors and industries. So with this new addition to the European Institute of Technology, which indeed combines the three sides of the knowledge triangle, that is research, innovation, education, and industry business. So I think here culture and creativity fully has its place, and it's very timely now that the co-legislators adopted this proposal in the context of the new legal base for the European Institute of Technology. So it's not only something that will really help bringing things forward, but I think it also shows the importance and the relevance of culture and creativity in the area of innovation together with education and research. So I'm looking forward to implementing this and launching the work on these few initiatives. But I'll just think I'll stop here. We will further focus our efforts on all the synergies and connections indeed with other forward-looking objectives and strategies, the Green Deal, obviously, the new European Bauhaus and the digital transition. So thank you once again also for this opportunity to participate.
Thank you very much for your answer. If I could just ask you one more question, because it came up in the Q&A box. Which is, do you have a timeline? Because I don't think you mentioned this. Do you have a timeline for the guidelines that we spoke about before in the previous question? Because I think it's a question a lot of people are interested in, because we have a lot of people involved in events and things like that here, in the attendees, of course. So these guidelines that were mentioned, is there a timeline for them?
The guidelines were, as you know, announced by the Commission last week, so we start now working on them.
Okay, so there's no concrete timeline. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I mean, we only have a few minutes left, so I'll just give everyone a last word, if I may. We may go a few minutes over. Mr. De Manuel, if I can ask you if you have anything to respond to Christianella. If not, then perhaps you could talk about the Recovery and Resilience Facility, how it's not obviously the only instrument that Next Generation EU and the overall EU crisis-related budget includes. So perhaps you could give us an overview of the other schemes that are supposed to be used for culture, and if there's any evaluation on how these schemes are released and how they've been released so far in practice.
Oh, thank you. Well, indeed, the instruments at the current juncture, there is no evaluation of the reach across sectors, and the Commission is, as I mentioned, encouraging member states to reach all sectors, but it's up to member states to decide how they do that. I would like perhaps to refer to SURE, the scheme that has provided support for short-time work schemes and equivalent measures, including for the self-employed across the European Union. And again, it has supported member states' efforts in these areas. And our latest implementation report, which is in fact the first, shows that around 25 million workers and more than 1.5 million businesses have benefited from this. And as we look forward into the recovery, of course, short-time work schemes cannot be there forever. There needs to be a reallocation of labor and capital from the, let's say, declining sectors to expanding sectors, which we will only know over time. But it is important to note, and a very clear Commission message, that the Union wants to keep supporting labor markets and wants to keep supporting workers and self-employed in these transitions that will take place in the recovery. And for that, we have urged member states to devise comprehensive packages of active labor market policies. We've called it EASE measures, effective active support for employment. And we have clearly indicated to them that the funding for the Recovery and Resilience Facility is available to fund these measures because they are forward-looking and can really play a double role. First, to leave no worker or self-employed people behind, and also to enable that growth, because what we see frequently in many sectors is that we lack skilled professionals, and these skill and active labor market policies should bridge that gap and achieve both objectives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If I could just go to Pedro Sobral for his last word. I don't know if you have any reaction to some of the things you've heard here. If not, I'd certainly want your opinion on kind of what are some of the elements you feel are needed for the recovery and resilience in your sector. Like, for example, would it help if bookshops were given official recognition as an essential service at the EU level? What type of things do you feel are needed for this resilience?
Yeah, I think one of the important or most important points is exactly that one. I think that books and bookshops should considered essential at the European level. We have some countries like France that has done it, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I think it's extremely important because, first of all, books and bookshops are essential. I think everyone agrees on that. So having it formally announced could help the sector to achieve some of its medium and long-term goals, and that's to maintain the cultural diversity and be capable to be one of the most important ecosystem in the cultural sector. The other one, and because it has proven, and sorry for being so specific, but that has proven to be extremely positive, for example, again in Italy, is simple measures like boost consumptions on books with book vouchers, for example. I think one of the main problems that this sector have in most of the European countries is the psychological barriers that sometimes books have literacy is still a problem in some countries, like mine, for example, and boosting consumption from the demand size with a simple tool like the book vouchers could be extremely interesting. First of all, because again, in European countries, it is proven to be an excellent and simple tool to do it. It helped the sector, but most of all, it helps almost all of the stakeholders that are involved in this sector. Sometimes we look only at 3 or 4 stakeholders, and I think also we agree that the CCIs, what they have is that they achieve a wide network of agents working from self-employed to big companies, from medium to small-size companies, boosting consumptions with a simple tool like this could be, and again, at the European level, a way also to close the gap between some of the countries, from the southern countries to the northern countries in the European Union. It could also, and again, at the short term, a good policy to help drive this crisis in the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Mr. Eller, the last word is yours. You've heard from Vivian Hoffman and the Commission's kind of response, and you've heard from Jean-Noël and Pedro Sobral about the kind of creative industry's response and their willingness to take action. The floor is yours for the last word.
I wouldn't question that. I think we really have to cooperate and we have any chance. My proposal is a practical one. Because it's so diverse in terms of what we need to do for this year, I would suggest that JESAC does before the summer conference, where they're inviting the Council and Commissioner Dombrovskis to give an overview on the proposals, recovery proposals in terms of the creative sector. Invite the Portuguese presidency, they might have an overview on that, invite the Commission, and have a discussion where you bring it to the point also in the public. What is actually planned from member states? What's the overview of the Commission in terms of the recovery plan and the CCIs? You can identify whether something had been proposed and how Commission is reacting on that. The same for the structural funds. I mean, we're going to see now the operational programs from the member states. Invite for the conference the DG Regio, which is encouraging and negotiating the structural funds programs, and invite the Council, giving an overview on the operational programs in terms of what is foreseen for the creative industry. And then go through the institution, analyze the working programs of the EIB in terms of the financial instruments. It is in the regulation what they're going to plan as financial instruments for that. Go to the EIC, 10 billion euro, and ask the EIC what are the innovation schemes, the SME program part of that in terms of the creative industry, and then come up with a list of proposals. And if I really want to react on publishing or on bookshops and so, ask for a call on the carbon footprint of the Amazon distribution system, and compare that to the carbon footprint if you would link bookshops and the different distribution systems in publishing to the carbon footprint. And you would see that you could organize the inner cities in a much more efficient way in terms of the carbon footprint if you would invest in technology, in new distribution systems, in a new perceptions of bookstops as store, and much better ways to distribute in terms of carbon footprint and books and services compared to Amazon. So have a list, 10 proposals, and ask the Commission to include that in the 22 calls. And then you have a certain point where you can bring it to the point, actually. Otherwise, you're going to lose the oversight, and then you will learn that in a lot of operational program, it's not in there, sorry, next time. You learn that in the recovery plan, just 4 countries did deliver, sorry, next time. You see that the EIB didn't roll out specific funding programs, loan programs for the creative sector, sorry, next time. So, I mean, in 21, you have to bring it to the point and then make it public. And then you can see who is delivering, who is not delivering, and put your own proposals. Because, I mean, the Commission can't just imagine for that relatively new sector, especially in its economic aspects, what they're supposed to do. And I think then you have your battle plan for 21. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, just to give maybe Mark Lamid from EY some concluding remarks, since we didn't bring you in any of this conversation.
No, that was not expected from me, but I just meant that I want to thank you. I guess you will do that on behalf of GESAC, but on behalf of the dozens of participants to our report. It was quite a complex task, but I just want to share that the perception prior to doing this study, which we did at the end of 2020, the perception was that culture and creative industries could be considered only for their social, societal values, an exception in business and economic terms, looking for emergency solutions, for subsidies and subsidies only. And quite the contrary, as economists, neutral economists, we found that actually culture is a real economy in its own right, and ready to transform, to innovate. Of course, it needs emergency solutions to reopen, to unlock, maybe quicker than some of the governments expected and want it to be. But it is ready to innovate, it is ready to transform. And actually, I'd say from the many interviews outside and inside the sector, we found that it's probably more ready than we all think to bring Europe to the next level. That's all I wanted to share, real conviction and a real observation in business terms.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And I'm speak on behalf of our whole team when I say thank you for this great report. It's become quite a reference document here in Brussels. So thank you to all our speakers. Sorry we couldn't get round into a more intense discussion and some more fruitful exchanges, but hopefully, as Mr. Eller mentioned, we can hold another conference closer to the summer or in the summer where we discuss all of these issues a bit more in depth, hopefully with some positive updates. So thank you to you, and thank you to all of our attendees who watched today, and we'll follow up with some more updates, and a recording of this event will be available online shortly afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.